Good afternoon and a warm welcome to the esteemed guests to the book release and discussion on Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, I'm an Ordinary Man, India's Struggle for Freedom 1914 to 1948. Within these pages lies a unique narrative weaving together Gandhiji's lesser-known narrative, anecdotes, personal reflections, and untold moments, offering an intimate glimpse into his humanity and the grandeur of India's fight for liberation. While we join in uncovering the lesser-known facets of this extraordinary journey, illuminating the distinct perspectives that set this book apart, let's welcome our distinguished speakers, Shri N.N. Vohra, Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, Smt Aruna Roy, Professor Tridip Suhrud, and Professor Gopalkrishna Gandhi. These eminent speakers, though, do not need any introduction, yet I would like to briefly say a few words about each one of them. Shri N.N. Vohra, past president and life trustee IAC, was the 12th governor of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. He has held several key positions in the government of India and received the Padma Vibhushan for his contributions to the field of civil service in 2007. He has been the author of several articles and books, most recent being edited volume on India's national security challenges. Welcome, sir. Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee is a renowned historian and author of and has taught history at the University of Calcutta and held visiting appointments at Princeton University, University of Manchester, and University of California at Santa Cruz. He was the editor, The Telegraph, Kolkata. Professor Mukherjee has several books to his credit, the latest being A New History of India from its Origins to 21st Century, published in 2023. Welcome, Professor Mukherjee. Srimati Aruna Roy is one of India's most prominent activists, a civil servant from 1968 to 1975, which she left to work with the rural poor in Rajasthan. Along with several others, she collectively formed an organization for the empowerment of workers and peasants in 1990, called MKSS, Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan. The MKSS played a pivotal role in drafting and advocating for the Rights to Information Law, which was passed by the Indian Parliament in 2005. A recipient of several awards, that includes the Ramon Magsaysay Award, Srimati Roy was listed as one of the 100 most influential people in the world by the Time magazine for 2011. Welcome, Mrs. Roy. Professor Tridip Suhrud is a renowned scholar in the field of political science and cultural history. He has extensively worked on the life and thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi and the social and cultural history of modern Gujarat. Prior to joining Smt University, Professor Suhrud was serving as the director and chief editor of Sabarmati Ashram Preservation and Memorial Trust, where he was also responsible for setting up of the Gandhi Archives. Professor Suhrud is the chairman of the governing council of MICA. Welcome, Professor Suhrud. And finally, Professor Gopalkrishna Gandhi, who is the life trustee of IIC and former governor of West Bengal, and author, and also the editor of the book being discussed today. I once again welcome all of you to this book discussion and release program. And now may I request Shri N.N. Vohra to release the book and also invite Shri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, Shri Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, Srimati Aruna Roy, and Professor Tridip Suhrud to join Vohra in releasing the book. Now I request Shri Gandhi to share his remarks with all of us. Over to you, sir.
Please don't be intimidated by the large number of yellow stickers in this book. I'm not going to read out from so many pages. Very, very few indeed. Just want to say that great Spanish song, Que Sera Sera, is something which was very much on my mind the last several hours today. And I thought, it is just so appropriate that I should have decided to read as the first excerpt from this book something which Gandhi said, which resonates with Ke Sara Sara, though he does not have Doris Day's voice. In Madras, on the 30th of January, it so happened, 1946, he writes, I asked this gathering to put me questions. And one person asked, what is the future of India? So I was just asked, what is the future of India? And I said, only God can say what is the future of India. I am an ordinary man. And I thought I must share with this wonderful gathering of such extraordinary people how and why he thought himself to be so ordinary. One of the main reasons was that his wife, a few days older than him, never allowed him to forget that he was a very ordinary man. And this book, which is all his words, has for its frontispiece the picture of Kasturba Kapadia from the day of her marriage, Kasturba Gandhi. Also made to feel extremely ordinary, never being allowed, in fact, to forget that he was ordinary, was his extraordinary son, my favorite uncle Harilal, who, and this is not in the book, on one occasion when his father and mother were passing through the station where he happened to be, and he was in many, many stations, and the train stopped, and the crowd surged and went in looking for the Mahatma and hailed him. And when there was a little silence, one voice was heard from the crowd, "Ma Kasturba ki jai." And Ba, who was in the train, said, "Aa to maro Hari che. This is my Hari." And then the crowd parted, and this man came into the train with an orange and said, "Ba taramate, this is for you." And then Bapu said, "Hari, nothing for me, nothing for you. This is for you, ma. Just promise. Tuj khashe. Only you will eat it." And then he slunk back. And the crowd moved over him. And as the train resumed its journey, another voice was heard, "Ma Kasturba ni jai, Ma Kasturba ni jai." And then as the train went on, she said to him, to her husband, "You are the father. I am the mother. We didn't even ask him if we could give him something of the food we are traveling with. So that is the ordinary man who is in this book. If you open any part of this book, and this book is nothing to do with the speaker. I speak not as one of his 5 surviving grandchildren or his many adherents, but as just one person rather taken by the frankness of his words, the veracity of his message, the scorching sadness of his thoughts, his experiences, and the rapture of his laughter. All. I'm just taken by that. And opening any of the pages in this book at random, I see how remarkable the man was. Ordinary as he was, and as he called himself. I shall draw your attention to 1942-43, when after the Quit India movement, they were all in jail. All of them. And by say all, I mean all. The entire Congress leadership, which was a national leadership, was in jail. And Kasturba was with Gandhi in what is called the Aga Khan Palace prison. And he went into a fast as he did because he said, you are telling me, to the Raj, you are telling me that I am responsible for all that has happened, for the violence that has followed. I am telling you that you are responsible. If you had not jailed us, if you had allowed us to continue the 42 Quit India resolution as we intended it to, there would have been no violence. He said, no, you are responsible for the violence. And there was violence, which he did not deny. But he went on a fast. During the course of the fast, the jail superintendent, Dr. Gilder, remarkable Parsi doctor, had his wedding anniversary, Dr. Gilder's wedding anniversary. And Dr. Gilder, who had, in a sense, allowed himself to be also declared a prisoner, was allowed some mangoes. And he brought in some mangoes and gave it to Gandhi and Kasturba to share. And while having the mangoes brought by the superintendent jail on his wedding anniversary, Kasturba asked Gandhi, now, how many years have we been married? So the fasting Mahatma said, why? Do you also, like Gilder, want to celebrate our anniversary? I think she must have said, why not? Anything wrong? She didn't. Or if she did, that's not recorded. And only what he said and what he wrote is recorded. Harilal visited her in that palace prison more than once, but never more remarkably than on the 22nd of February. That 22nd of February was a date which nobody could really have forgotten from the family, and nobody did. It was 1944. He writes, on the evening of 22nd February, I was called by her. I took over from those who were giving her restful support. I leaned her against my shoulder and little better now? So to recap for a moment, she is dying. She's in her dying moments. And he says, on the evening of 22nd February, I was called by her. I took over from those who were giving her restful support. I leaned her against my shoulder and tried to give her what comfort I could. All present, some 10 of them, stood in front. She moved her arms for fuller comfort, and then in the twinkling of an eye, with Harilal, Ramdas and Devdas also behind her, the end came. It was 7:35 p.m. by the Hindu calendar, Shivaratri. Messages of condolence came the next day. None came from Qaid-e-Azam, M.A. Jinnah. We move a few years into the same decade. He is in conflict. Conflict by the messages he is receiving from East Bengal, just becoming East Pakistan, and messages coming from Bihar, which is then under Congress administration. The messages from Noakhali make him go there immediately, make him leave everything that he is doing and go there. And he finds, when he goes there, things being much worse than he had ever imagined, things which he had not seen earlier in many of the riots which he had sought to quell, many of the situations which he had found himself in involving violence and death. And then in one village, he says, we are walking out, and as we are walking out, a Tibetan spaniel comes and crosses our path and tells something to me. And everyone said to the spaniel, go, go, go. But I said, no, the spaniel is selling a message. Don't ignore the spaniel. And so we followed the spaniel. And the spaniel took us to a house where every single person, man, woman, and child, had been butchered. And I said, see, he knows more than we. And then there was Bihar. And he rushed to Bihar. He being barefoot. Not always, but in Noakhali, barefoot. Now going to Bihar, where, if you can call it the compliment, that it was not, it was being returned with ferocity. And in Bihar, he said, thank you. Is it or is it not a fact? And this was at a Congress gathering in the village of Bir. Is it or is it not a fact that quite a large number of congressmen took part in the disturbances in Bihar? I ask this question because people are making this allegation. But the congressmen can themselves tell me the truth. Tell me, how many members, 132 of them of your committee, were involved? I wish to ask you, how could you live to see an old woman of 110 years being butchered before your eyes? How could you tolerate it? I was speaking in Hindustani, and I then asked, मैं आपसे पूछना चाहता हूँ, आप जिंदा क्यों हैं? आप जिंदा क्यों हैं? Back in Delhi, I was staying in Bhangi colony. At my prayer meeting in the Valmiki Mandir one evening, a Hindu Mahasabha youth stood up and shouted, "This is a Hindu temple. We won't let you recite any Muslim prayer here." some people tried to eject the youth from the grounds, and I intervened. I said, I shall not proceed with the prayer so long as there is a single person here objecting. I want to ensure the fullest freedom to the dissenting minority. The young man then tried to work his way up to the rostrum. Others prevented him. I moved halfway down to meet him, saying, let no one come between me and this young man. He said, let no one come between him and me. This was before the 30th of January, 1948. Let no one come between him and me. Again, up sprang a young man and repeated the previous day's objection. This is a Hindu temple. We want the prayer to continue. The gathering said, proceed, proceed. Bapu, proceed, please. Thousands want the prayer to be held. The young man sat down and another rose. All right, I said. Let everyone keep calm and quiet. Tomorrow I shall put again this question to you, and it will be open even to a little child by simply saying no. With that, I left the ground and back in my room, I prayed inside my room. Jawaharlal entered the room while the prayer was on, and he was Prime Minister. Entered the room while the prayer was on and took his place quietly among the congregation. I want to go a few days further. We don't associate him with music, do we? But there are two songs with which he cannot be separated, from which he cannot be separated. The two songs which are intertwined in his life, completely intertwined in his life. Two songs. Vaishnava Janato, which talks about the parai's pida, the pain of the other. Who the other is does not matter, but the pain is what matters. And the other song, which took place in many, many homes, over centuries, I think. Raghupati Raghav Rajaram got a new turn in the villages of Noakhali when one day, as he writes in this book, as you might find, Manu, his grandniece, suddenly had an inspiration. And she added a line. Manu, whose diaries are being edited by Professor Tridip Suhrud, she added a line, Ishwar Allah Tero Naam. And Ishwar Allah Tero Naam then became part of that song. It was not there earlier. It was Noakhali's gift to humanity. Ishwar Allah Tero Naam. These two songs, the other is Pain, and Ishwar Allah Tero Naam. These two songs, which can be heard through this book, are the essence of this ordinary man's life. On the 20th of January, a non-lethal bomb exploded at the prayer meeting site. I asked the congregation to maintain calm. And you can hear this in an All India radio tape, which has miraculously survived, miraculously made and miraculously survived. And he says, he's talking in his prayer meeting, he's saying some simple words, and then you just hear this explosion. And then his voice, which says, कुछ नहीं हुआ है, कुछ नहीं हुआ है, अगर सच में कुछ हो जाए तो क्या करोगे? And then an illiterate woman, felicitously named Sulochana, the one of the felicitous eyes, Sulochana, she spied this man who had placed that bomb. I admired her courage. And then he writes, those who are behind him or whose tool he is should know that this sort of thing will not serve Hinduism. my time is coming to a close, and we are all gathered to hear our discussants. So I shall now conclude by the last few words in this excerpting. Devadas and his wife Lakshmi came at 9:30 p.m. on the 29th of January. What news? I asked him. He was an editor. He said there was nothing special to report. How does the ship of state fare? He asked me. I'm sure the little differences will vanish. After some more talk, he asked if I would sleep now. No, there is no hurry. Talk some more, talk some more, I said. On 30th of January, I span as Vallabhai came and talked, and then ate my meal. This now is a paraphrase, not as recorded by him, but as extracted from the descriptions of Pyarelal. We talked beyond the prayer time of 5 p.m. I did not notice Abha trying to remind me of the time. It was 10 minutes past 5 when I got up. I got into my chappals and walked to the prayer ground. Abha said, "Your watch must have felt neglected." I laughed and said, "When I have timekeepers, why should I look at my watch?" But she said, "You would not look at your timekeepers either." I said to her, "I hate being late. I hate being late." Friends, on the 22nd of March, 1959, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "They killed him, this man who had galvanized 400 million Indians for independence. Here was a man of love falling at the hands of a man of hate. But the man who shot Gandhi only shot him into the hearts of humanity." And Bill Mauldin, a great cartoonist, has this cartoon. And we must end anything about Gandhi not with tears, but with laughter muted or open. This cartoon has Gandhi and Luther King on a cloud. Gandhi welcoming him and saying, "The odd thing, Dr. King, is the assassins think they have killed you."
Thank you very much, sir, for giving us a broad landscape of the salient features of this book. Now, may I request Shri Vohra for his remarks and thereafter taking the discussion forward. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be associated with this evening's function to release this book, the second volume on the life and times of Mahatma Gandhi, who called himself an ordinary man. Now, for several reasons, time is one of them. I will consciously avoid focusing on the ordinary man whose values and teachings are respected the world over. Ever since he was shot in 48, shot dead, that has made no difference in the currency of his teachings, the currency of his values, and the respect that he commands all over the world. As Gopal just mentioned, quoting Martin Luther King, that the person who assassinated him shot him into the minds and hearts of millions all over the world. I think nothing could be truer. Now coming to the not-so-ordinary man, the editor, the author, Gopal Gandhi, my good friend, he now doesn't claim, never mentions, but he belongs to a very proud and privileged lineage. He's accomplished in his own right. I will not refer to his work as an administrator or as a diplomat, but I think the more valued part of his personality and teachings is his writing, his translations, his contribution to literature, and in more recent times, as an admired and respected teacher. Now, what he has done to produce this book, this volume, along with a known scholar, Professor Suhrud, sitting here, is a great contribution not only to the history of the Indian freedom struggle, to the times through which Gandhiji passed, through which he worked, through which he struggled, the colonial masters whom he faced on a day-to-day basis. This volume is a history of Indian struggle, freedom struggle, a history of India, a sociological history of India, and in some manner a political history of India. So I would pay my compliments and tribute to Gopal for bringing this volume out. But the first volume he didn't refer to for obvious reasons, but that itself is also a remarkable volume. The work he has done is a remarkable tribute of a grandson to a grandfather. And if you were to, those of us who are here today and those who are not here, my comment is, my message is, that this is a book which must be read. It has wonderfully, beautifully put together the essence of the Mahatma's letters to whomever he wrote. He wrote to his son, grandsons, to his friends, collaborators, colleagues, Indians, foreigners, people in England whom he had known, people in South Africa whom he had worked with. Government records, both in India and abroad. Books, journals, newspapers, interviews, all these have been, with great research and the labor of love, put together in prose, which, as Gopal says, are his own words of the ordinary man. Beautiful verse, beautiful prose, almost reads like a story. Still maintaining the chronology. As you read, there is no reason to be interrupted or to go back to an earlier page to find out who's who. The most wonderful part of this book, if I may mention, among many other attributes, are the notes and the footnotes. Now, each of these footnotes is by itself a remarkable piece of research. If Gandhiji refers to a person by name, in India or abroad, man or a woman, then a quarter of a page or sometimes even longer footnote tells us who this person is, when that person was born, where he was educated, what he was doing, whether he was an ICS officer or a collaborator of Mahatma. So I am mentioning this to point out the enormous amount of work and scholarship which has gone into producing this wonderful volume. In his preface, Gopal says in his usual modest manner that he has perhaps made no better contribution then change the tense of the original text from the present to the past. I totally disagree with him. He has done much more. He's produced a wonderful volume which will be read for decades to come. Now this book, as all of you would realize if you happen to read it, is not only a wonderful narration, a reflection of Gandhiji's self-imposed, punishing Spartan life of eating almost nothing in 24 hours, sleeping on the ground, working till 3 o'clock in the morning, replying to letters from wherever they had come, putting them in envelopes, closing the envelopes, and leaving them for somebody to post them next morning. He had ailments, he had pleurisy, his ribs used to pain, he used to hold his ribs together, but never stopped his work, never gave up any commitment that he had. He's a remarkable man in terms of self-discipline, sacrifice. This book also brings out his thought processes, his pragmatism, his practical approach to dealing with the colonial masters, trying out an idea, first an experiment. If it worked, he would enlarge it, he would do it on a bigger scale. And as I said, amongst the travails and the struggles of the Mahatma, which he recounts, which this book recounts, are the ruthless policies of the British colonial masters, particularly their agrarian policies of sucking the last drop of blood from the tillers, agriculturists, taking away all their produce, exporting it to England. There was starvation, there was hunger, famines, sickness, disease. Sickness, disease, even in the ashram which he had set up. That problem was faced for very many years. And since I'm now beyond my time, I've just briefly mentioned that this volume, in my understanding and my perspective, also gives us, though it's not intended, that's not the first objective, a very good understanding of some of the other personalities who subsequently became known as great personalities, great leaders of India. In his interrelation, the Mahatma's interrelation with these people, his regard and respect for them, his disagreements with them, they all come out. There was an occasion when he got impassioned about a lady, fellow worker, and expressed some desire to enter into a spiritual marriage with her. And the letter that C. Rajagopalachari wrote to him when Mahatma informed him about his feelings is another piece of literature. Upbraided him and advised him against, and the Mahatma then, of course, recanted. And then he was honest enough, and that's a great, remarkable attribute of the man, honest enough to admit that he had erred. I will not say anything very much more except to conclude by saying that the Mahatma's influence on at least my generation, the early 1930s generation, was enormous. Later generations, I can't speak for them. But once again, I think the cycle has turned now. We will start again valuing with the way things are happening around the world. We'll start valuing the Mahatma's teachings and his values. Peaceful satyagraha, non-cooperation, civil disobedience, ahimsa, non-violence, anti-untouchability, spinning khadi, and particularly Hindu-Muslim amity. He tried his level best through the decades He admitted his failures. 1946, when the direct action day resulted in Hindu-Muslim riots and hundreds dead, this occasion is worth reading what Gandhiji said to himself and to others. So I will stop here and once again compliment Gopal and his fellow collaborators and scholars who have worked with him for this wonderful contribution to our times. Thank you.
It takes a lot of courage, I can tell you, to speak about Gandhi after Gopalkrishna Gandhi and before Tridip Suhrud. I hope none of you can see my trembling knees. I will begin with the title, not of this book, but the book, the volume that precedes this, that covers Gandhi's life from his birth to his return to India in 1915. That volume is called Restless as Mercury. This is how the boy Mohan was described by one of his sisters. That's what he was like as a child, restless as Mercury. I'll come back to another facet of this remarkable description of a young boy. But the question I want to start with is, how does a boy that is restless as Mercury become an ordinary man? It's not just because Kasturba always prevailed upon him to be ordinary. Gandhi fashioned himself to be an ordinary Indian, to be like an ordinary Indian, so that he could be their voice, their representative, their conscience, their spokesman. And for a very long time, he was the sole spokesman of millions of Indians. And it is not a coincidence that in his first trial in India, in Ahmedabad, when he is in court, and following court protocol, he is asked, your name, the judge asks him, your name, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, your occupation, farmer and weaver. He doesn't say he's the undisputed leader of the Congress. He doesn't say he's a qualified barrister at law. He doesn't say that a few months before a Christian bishop had described him as the Christ of the 20th century. He identifies himself with the commonest Indian, the ordinary Indian. That's how Gandhi fashioned himself, and that's how Gandhi wanted to lead his life. His very appearance, a loincloth, bare-bodied, shaft in hand, was how we remember him, and that's how he made himself look to represent the ordinary Indian. He was an ordinary Indian who led an extraordinary country and an extraordinary group of people. It was not a coincidence that in the last few months of his life, that restlessness, restless as Mercury, recurs to haunt him. From 1946 to 1948, he's moving around, traversing parts of North India, particularly Eastern India, scarred by communal violence, people who have lost their morale or lost their will to live because of the butchery that they have survived or they have been affected by. Gandhi is among them, restless as Mercury. He is not sitting at the negotiating table in Delhi to discuss how India can be carved out into two nation states. He is among them, the ordinary people of India, like the ordinary man that he was. When he goes to Noakhali, he goes alone, with only Nirmal Bose as his secretary and interpreter, and Parasuram as his stenographer. He goes alone, and that's what reminds me of a third song that was part of Gandhi's life. Jodi tor dak shune keu na ashe, tobe ekla cholo re. If nobody answers to your call, then walk alone. And he walked alone to Noakhali. He walked alone after the violence in Chauri Chaura, completely withdrawing from the non-cooperation movement. He had that moral courage. As an ordinary man, he lived in a hovel in Noakhali, and Nirmal Bose records, he couldn't sleep. And he paced the floor of that hovel, muttering to himself when he saw darkness all around him. Kya karu? Kya karu? He was an ordinary man with an extraordinary conscience. That's what made him the Mahatma. The problem with only trying to understand Gandhi from excerpted bits of what he wrote is that some very vital pieces of information, some very significant telling anecdotes get left out. One is something that I have already mentioned. Kya karu? We only get to know that from Nirmal Bose's account. Similarly, and Gopal has already evoked the atmosphere of 22nd February 1944. A few days after that, when the funeral pyre is being lit by Devdas Gandhi, Mira Bahan records, she was standing next to Bapu, and she writes, Bapu turned to me and he said, Mira, the best part of me has gone. What will I do now? This is not there in Bapu's writings. He said it to Mira Bahan. But it's so important to understand the relationship between Kasturba and Gandhi, and why Kasturba could prevail upon him to always remain an ordinary man. Gopal has also paraphrased that last moment of his life. I always think of it as Gandhi's passion. I hate being late. Perhaps he was too early for India's Swaraj. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. And thank you, IIC, for organizing this event and for persuading people like me to reread Gandhi. I was born in a generation when he didn't exist in a book. he didn't exist in a statute. He was part of my life. I was brought up in Delhi, lived here as a very young child. Went to his prayer meeting as a very, very young child. Was there when he was assassinated. And in my childhood memories, I bear the sorrow of a great loss without knowing what it was about at that time. In my adult life, Gandhi has been a companion all through, especially in my activist years, in trying to work with very ordinary people, understanding how much he had done in his life to help people like me, so many of us in India, walk that path again with honesty, with integrity, with humility, and with complete compassion. So today I've come to share what I found in this book, which was of relevance to me, and therefore of relevance to so many people in this country, and I hope to all the young people who should read him to find how relevant he is. I don't need to tell you that in today's India, Gandhi is seen as an anachronism, which he is not. He lives. And it's his life and his relevance that's come home to me very powerfully today. When I was young, Gandhi was not in a contentious space. Today, he's in a contentious space, and you have to argue for even talking about Mahatma Gandhi. It was so much a part of so many things we did. As I read this book, I was really surprised. The things I take so much for granted came from his work, his life, his opinions, his instincts, and his determination. He calls himself an ordinary man, and he's right, because he's so much like so many other Indians that he managed to appeal to the entire country. He had an intellect which appealed to the intellectuals, but he was a very ordinary, normal Indian who cared for his goat, who cared for how the march to Dandi would take place, who detailed things which are so normal and natural to people. As a woman activist, I'd like to say his personal and political were one. We talk so much about personal is political. For Gandhi, his personal was political, and his political was personal. He also, I think, consciously wanted that identity of the ordinary person to become his main identity. And I know how important it is today, more so today than ever before, when the icons and the people who exaggerate what they have done become the pasteboard figures who dominate our lives. Gandhi was flesh and blood. He was a human being with a quality, a moral fiber, humor, a sense of the ridiculous, who appealed to us as a normal human being. I'm really pleased that Gopal chose this line, "I am an ordinary man," for the title of this book, because that's what he was, that's what he wanted to be identified as. And in that identity and in that recognition that he sought us to accept, he became extraordinary. His politics, his point of view, his compassion, his ideology, even some of his eccentricities, reached people because he was like everybody else. Today, our leaders are not. The legacy, the enormity of it, I would have been very worried if I had been Gopal as to how I would really bring it together to place it before all of us. But I think he's done a remarkable job, because he's done it with a curious sense of detachment. He calls him MKG. He doesn't even call him Gandhi or my grandfather or anything. He has always called him MKG. So MKG is a public figure, but MKG is also his grandfather, a person with whom he had intimate moments, and he has had access to documents many of us have never had, probably never will. And to bear this legacy in the lightest possible manner and to share it with all of us is his great contribution to fight privilege. We can fight the privilege of money easier, we can fight the privilege of other status easier, but fight the privilege of this legacy is impossible. And he's brought this legacy to us in the form of this book, and to whom I owe a special word of thanks for bringing this book to us, Gopu, and going through the arduous task of sifting through information to find out what best should be put in and what should not. when I read about Champaran and how he got into the Champaran debate, which I've read before, I've known many of these incidents before, they were not new. But in his words of simplicity, of sharing with you as an individual, he talks to us as human beings, as normal human beings. When he talks about Champaran, it could be the first lesson an activist learns, that to fight the big battles, you have to fight the small ones. To bring the people into the larger political debate, you have to fight the smaller political issues. And without Champaran, he could not have begun India's great demand for independence. He established so many norms when he fought in Champaran for issues. Our Champaran today has got to be redefined. We don't know what it is today, but a new Champaran awaits us somewhere, a political Champaran to be redefined so that we can take India to its older heights of secular acceptance, of plurality, of everybody having an equal place in this country. The concept of equality the Constitution has given us. The Dandi March. I always admired Gandhiji for his extreme gift, capacity to identify such a simple thing as looking for salt, finding salt, and then defying a law. What a simple thing, that the salt was in everybody's diet, the poor, the rich, all castes, all communities, north, south, east, and west. When you think of it, it was a terribly simple, small thing. But how did he achieve it? And when I read this book, he says it came to him in a flash. How many of us accept intuition today in the manner in which he accepted it? How many of us work on intuition, and after all, intuition comes from long hours of wandering, thinking, being challenged as to find ways there. And I was amazed that when he developed this whole march, talked about it, what are the details he looked at? Only 76 or 78 of them began marching from Ahmedabad. They were not large numbers. This is something we continue to say when we fight big struggles. And people say, "Arey bhai, hamare saath koi nahi hai." Then we say, if Dandi could begin with 78, we had 300 people. So we shouldn't think ourselves small. The issue is not how many we are. The issue is the issue. Is it an issue that will appeal to people? Is it an issue that will touch every home? He had great wisdom, great shrewdness, great capacity, and he had the swiftness of an activist to act upon it. When he planned the Dandi March, he also planned how many would go, and he says in his Gujarati, Hindi, or I don't know if it's Gujarati, he must have written in Gujarati, no one should eat anything but rotla or rotli and dal. There will be no sweets. There will be nothing special, not even chai. And that we will all go, and we will also have to find spaces to accommodate our morning jobs, because in those days there were no toilets. He goes to the last detail. And I thought, how many things that we have planned in the many yatras in India, so many yatras, the details that we plan in the yatras, the way we plan those yatras, the way we plan interaction with people when we go on these yatras, how do we react with those communities in those yatras? Things that activists in the audience will know what I'm talking about, have come down to us as tradition. Gandhi is in India in many invisible ways. I think what we'll have to do, and what this book really tells me, and it's of great value to me, is to recognize him where he is. Today in my life, as an activist, whether it is a march, whether it is the activity, whether it is looking at how I live, and of course, the great inspiration that pushed us all into Devdungri in Rajasthan, to try and live like the poor, live in a village mud hut, carry water, experience what the poor do, otherwise you'll never know what they need or they want, which gave birth to some of the laws we fought for. I recognize Mahatma Gandhi everywhere. The Bapu Kuti in Wardha is a shrine for many of us, not an empty shrine, but a shrine which tells you how exactly one can live with the very minimal and live well, beautifully, aesthetically, and comfortably. So I'll end there by saying that we all today have a pall of grey hanging on our heads. Most of the discussions where Gandhi is a topic, Mahatma Gandhi is a topic. Is Gandhi relevant today? I feel there is myopia. Gandhi has been relevant, is relevant, and will be relevant for satyagrahis like us who believe in non-violence, non-violent protest against might, for those of us who believe in the political and moral value of the right against the wrong, for those of us who face the bayonets and the cops when we stand in protest and we are sometimes very often incarcerated. Gandhi lives in each one of those moments. He is alive today as he has never been before, and I think I would really say that all of you should buy the book and read it because it's so easy to read. The language of Mahatma Gandhi is so simple, so telling, so direct, and so beautiful that he brings back the words of my father to me when I was very young. You must read Gandhi, you will improve your English because his language is biblical. So thank you, Gopal, for this wonderful book.
Professor Suhrud.
Namaskar. We must ask Gopal Bhai as to why write these two books? Why put these two volumes together, Restless as Mercury and I'm an Ordinary Man? Because he, like all of us, is aware, and deeply so, that there is the autobiography. There is my experiments with truth. A remarkable work, a work like no other, perhaps the finest position from which the story of the self in search of truth, in his quest to see God face to face, could actually be written. So the kind of ground that the autobiography occupies is of an extraordinary kind. There is also a large biographical literature, the kind of literature, every aspect of his life, every anecdote is told to us by either his colleagues or his associates, people that were close to him, people who claim closeness to him. Why attempt this? And I think it's important to understand the distinction between an act of the autobiography that Gandhi does and what has been done through these two volumes. And it's only when we understand the nature of the first-person account that's available to us in the autobiography as very distinct from every other time that he referred to himself. Gandhi's self-reference was very different from our self-reference, and Gujaratis have a particular way of referring to themselves. His self-referentiality is different. What is he doing in the autobiography that is different from an account that Gopal Bhai read or the accounts that we read? The anecdote that you said, a very, very crucial moment in his life on 11th March 1922 when he describes himself as a farmer or a weaver, or 6 years before that when he describes himself as a teacher subsisting on his own wage. We will not find these in the autobiography for two reasons. One, autobiography is technically only half a life. It ends when he could go write no more, which is 1921. Everything that happens to him thereafter, his own reflections on himself, his own struggles, in fact, the more intense struggles, fighting his own impulses, overcoming his own shortcomings, actually are to come in the years of 1930s and again in 1940s. None of those are available to us, and therefore we require an understanding as to how he sought to understand himself, how he sought to describe himself. So that's one minor reason. But I think even if he had written the entire story, let's counterfactually ask ourselves, if he had written the autobiography as he was asked, write part 2, If he had done that sitting in Aga Khan, long years in Aga Khan, he could have done the second part. He doesn't do that. Even if he had done that, would an act like this have been of merit? And I do believe that this act would have been of merit, because what the autobiography sought to do was very different. What the autobiography does says, this is a story of a soul in quest of truth. And if you do not grant the writer and the seeker that possibility that one could actually be in search for truth, autobiography has no meaning. Autobiography becomes meaningful only if we walk along with Gandhi in that quest, in that search. That's one. Second, we also have to understand that it takes a very special act on part of Gandhi to write the autobiography. It's a kind of indwelling that he has never done. Here is this extremely restless person who says, I need to be on a sabbatical. And the word that he uses is sabbatical. What does he do? Takes recess from all other political work, all other social engagements, and says, I will dwell within the ashram and within the ashram community, not even in the city of Ahmedabad, within the ashram. And what does he do? For 1 year, he dwells within himself. And what comes out is, at one level, the autobiography, and two other remarkable things. And those three things have to be read together as far as I'm concerned. In the morning, to the ashram colleagues and associates, he gives 279 discourses on the Bhagavad Gita, a text that he thought was a kind of a guidebook for a life of ever-wakefulness. And that ever-wakefulness allows him to throw that searchlight upon himself, dwell within himself. Early morning, he does the Bhagavad Gita. After their hours, he sits and does the autobiography week after week, day after day, not only in one language. We know it's being simultaneously be translated by Mahadev. He looks over it in English, and when we compare the two, we know that it is both their hands working in two languages, which become the autobiography for us. And third thing, which is, I think, one of the greatest cultural losses caused by Gujarat, that he was to, at the invitation of his own students at Gujarat Vidyapith, was to lecture in the afternoons. The students said, you're doing nothing, why don't you come and lecture to us, teach us a text, teach us a great text. And he says, you choose the text, and the students choose Sermon on the Mount. And he is to lecture once a week through that year on the Sermon on the Mount. Of course, those lectures do not take place. He is charged in his own university of proselytizing, of trying to turn the minds of the young towards Christianity and the life of Christ. Gandhi writes a public response to it, which is called On the Charge of Being a Closet Christian. It's a very beautiful essay. It's an essay that all of us need to be. So there is a very special thing that's happening. The autobiography is, in fact, being sandwiched by two other great reflections that he carries with himself, the Bhagavad Gita and the life of Christ. And they intermingle. When we think of how they intermingled, and if we had that text available, we could have seen how he reads the life of Christ into the Gita, because at some point he's asked, what is a yogi? And Gandhi's response is, it's the way Christ lived and died is the perfect example of a yogi. So it's something happening in that year which gives us the autobiography. In absence of that year, and in its absence of that process, in that indwelling, what he calls dwelling within the antaratma, the antaryami, we would not have the kind of text that the autobiography gives. These reflections are autobiographical, but are of a different material. He is talking about himself, he's referring to himself, sometimes in first person. He's also capable, as we know, of writing about himself and people closest to him in the third person, as a reporter would. And we have that great incident of a little satyagraha that Devdas Gandhi does in a train. They all had a thing about train and being thrown out of it for wearing the wrong clothes. And Gandhi reports that in third person. So he would talk about himself. When he writes about himself outside the autobiography, we get something else. It is also the biography of the family life that we begin to get. It's only when he writes these letters where he begins to talk about himself, and while talking about himself, he would say, and Harilal's up to this. Devdas is doing this, he is editing the Independent, so-and-so is in jail, Ba is doing this, the grandchildren are doing this. The construction of the family life, and the family life is entirely, largely absent from the autobiography. When you were to read the autobiography, one could be wrongly led to believe that here is this person who thinks of himself so autonomous from everyone else that there is not even a reference available to us of what's happening to institution, people, processes. And that's the sense that these two books actually take away, that you begin to get a far more textured, more layered, in some ways more nuanced self-reflections. That's one very important. Second, the literary forms which become available to Gandhi, and I think both Gopal Bhai and Rudrangshu are here. Literary forms are very important to Gandhi. He is somebody who crafts and works with literary forms with great care. If it's a form of a dialogue, then you get a Hind Swaraj. If it's a newspaper article, you get something else. You get essays of Young India, of Navjivan, of Harijan Bandhu. What you get here are all literary forms combined. You get the essay, because in essays he talks about himself. You get the letter form. You get a dialogue when he is actually being quizzed. He is responding to questions. You get long form essays, because some of these essays that when he talks about himself are rather long. These are not 923 words that a newspaper wants out of us. These are long form essays that he. So there is each literary form allows him to talk about himself in very different modalities. And all of those modalities become available to us in these two volumes, particularly the second one, where he is actually a far more confident writer. And you could also see a journey of a person as a writer between two volumes, of Gandhi describing himself early on, his first public speech. Even then, he thought of himself as doing something extraordinary. He says, follow my example. His first speech in the Rajkot school when he is going to England, he says, more of you should go to England. And that's how you touch the Gujarati chord, travel. And so so there is a self-reference in the very first act that happens. And there is also a self-reference in one of the last statements that he makes about himself, which is to Manu. Which is to say, and he writes in his diary, that it will be your duty to proclaim to the world that I was a false person that I was not a true devotee of God if I were to die of a lingering illness. It's only if I am able to meet an assassin's bullets with the name of God on my lips, without hatred, will you proclaim to the world that I was a true devotee of God. Now, that is something that is writing about himself. It's a reflection on what his aspirations are, what his fears are, and all of those things become available to us through these two volumes. So thank you very much. I was gladly but falsely implicated as your co-editor, not of this volumes, but of other volumes that we've worked on together. It's been a great privilege to have done so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Suhrud. Ladies and gentlemen, we are a little out of time, beyond our normal schedule, but I particularly request Gopal for the next few minutes to read out certain portions which he couldn't do in the first instance. Please.
I shan't take more than 2 minutes. Just to say that in 1945, a 25-year-old young Malayali went and sought an appointment with Gandhi because he had got a Tata scholarship to study in London. And he went to Gandhi. It was a day of silence, but he got his answers in writing. The question was, when I go to London and I am asked about the Harijan question, should I answer as a Harijan or as an Indian? Gandhi did not know that the questioner was one day going to become Vice President of India and President of India, K.R. Narayanan. The answer that Gandhi gave was an answer which could be given as a model answer for probationers in the Indian Foreign Service. Gandhi's answer was, when abroad you will say the Harijan question is our question, which we will solve once you have left India. One question, an excerpt. When raiders neared Srinagar, I gave in my own phrase tacit consent to the dispatch of Indian forces to Kashmir. And on October 29, I said, the job of armed soldiers is to march ahead and repel the attacking army. After all, Kashmir cannot be saved by the Maharaja. If anyone can save Kashmir, it is only the Muslims, the Kashmiri Pandits, the Rajputs, and the Sikhs who live there. The poison that has spread amongst us should never have spread. Through Kashmir, that poison might be removed from us. Friends, I'll end with something which Tridip had mentioned. There is, in his favorite Hindi sage poet Tulsidas, a great line. Janamu janamu muni jatana karai. Janamu janamu muni jatana karai. Antarama mukha avatanai. He had said nobody should be between me and that young man. But there was one between him and the young man. Rama.
Thank you very much to all the distinguished speakers for unveiling those lesser-known anecdotes and untold moments in such a lucid way. Thank you very much. Now I invite Shri Kamalvalli, Secretary ISC, to propose vote of thanks.
Honorable N.N. Vohra ji, Shri Gopalkrishna Gandhi ji, distinguished guests at the dais, ladies and gentlemen, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you over here with your presence at this book release and discussion on the Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, I Am an Ordinary Man, India's Struggle for Freedom. Your presence has truly illuminated this occasion, enriching our dialogue and deepening our understanding of Gandhiji's enduring legacy. I express our deepest appreciation to our esteemed speakers, Shri N.N. Vohra ji, Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, Smt Aruna Roy, Professor Tridip Suhrud, and Professor Gopalkrishna Gandhi, for your invaluable insights and profound reflections. Your wisdom has added layers of depth to our understanding of Gandhiji's extraordinary journey and the significance of this book. I extend profound gratitude to Shri Gopalkrishna Gandhiji for crafting this remarkable narrative and sharing his invaluable perspectives with us. Your dedication to preserving history and shaping our collective consciousness is truly commendable. Our special thanks to all the ladies and gentlemen who are present here today to make this event vibrant and also fuel the spirit of engagement. As we conclude this gathering, let us carry forth the spirit of introspection and learning that this book has ignited. Thank you once again for your unwavering support and participation. Jai Hind.